He thought he was divorcing a nobody. He had no idea he was signing his own death warrant. A black credit card hit the table like an insult. $10,000? Brandon sneered at his wife of 2 years. That should cover a month's rent in Queens. His mistress smirked from the corner, already mentally redecorating his penthouse. They saw a broken woman in a faded sweater. A waitress with no connections, no money, no future. But they never bothered to look at the man sitting quietly in the shadows. The man in the three-piece suit, worth more than Brandon's entire company. The man whose portrait hung in the lobby of this very building. What Brandon did not know was that the woman he just threw away like garbage was about to inherit more money than he could count in 10 lifetimes. And the man watching from the darkness, that was her father, Harrison Caldwell, the billionaire who owned the tower they were standing in. In exactly 72 hours, Brandon would lose everything: his company, his apartment, his reputation, and even the woman he cheated with. All because he never asked his wife one simple question: who is your family? This story will show you why the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous, and why you should never underestimate a woman who chooses to stay silent. Inside the offices of Holloway and Associates, the air was thick with the scent of pricey leather, old coffee, and the bitter end of a marriage. The room was on the 45th floor of a midtown Manhattan high-rise, offering a sweeping view of New York City, shrouded in gray rain. Audrey was seated at one end of the long, gleaming mahogany table, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She had on a plain beige sweater that was worn and faded, and she wore no jewelry at all, having removed her wedding ring 3 days earlier. Brandon sat across from her. He perfectly embodied the image of the up-and-coming tech genius he pretended to be. He was dressed in a tailor-made navy blue suit made from fine Italian fabric. His watch, a Patek Philippe, was worth more than a luxury car, and he wore a smile that could slice through steel. "Let us get this over with, Audrey," Brandon said, pushing the pile of papers across the table toward her. The documents scraped noisily against the polished surface. "I am exhausted, and you are exhausted. We can both admit this marriage was a mistake." "A mistake?" Audrey echoed quietly. Her tone was firm, but her gaze was locked on the word dissolution in bold letters, the top of the page. "Do not act like a victim," Brandon sighed, reclining in his high-tech office chair. "Listen, you were a waitress at Luku when I found you. I believed I was saving you from that life. I expected you would be thankful to be married to the chief executive officer of Nexus Stream. But frankly, you never fit into this lifestyle. You have no idea what to wear to formal events. You are clueless about how to speak with potential backers. You are simply," he gestured dismissively, unable to find a gentle way to finish his thought, "boring." A voice added from the other side of the room. Audrey showed no reaction. She was well aware Jessica was present. Jessica, who worked as Brandon's executive assistant, was lounging by the window, absorbed in her phone. She was a 22-year-old blonde in a dress completely unsuitable for a legal meeting. "She is just boring, Brandon," Jessica remarked, without lifting her eyes from her device. "And her cooking is strange. Nobody serves pot roast to a vice president of marketing. It is so embarrassing." Brandon let out a small laugh. "Exactly. The issue is, Audrey, my company is preparing to be publicly traded. The initial public offering is scheduled for next month. My legal and public relations teams advise that a swift separation now is preferable. Being single will present a better image than being married to an unknown when I am opening the New York Stock Exchange." Audrey raised her head to meet his eyes. "So this is the reason. After 2 years together, I am now considered a risk to your company's value. It is just business, Audrey." "Do not take it personally," Brandon replied, tapping his finger on the documents. "This is the offer. Our prenuptial agreement states you receive nothing. since you brought nothing into the marriage, but I am feeling generous." He retrieved a black credit card from his pocket and flicked it onto the table. The card spun before stopping close to her hand. "That has a $10,000 limit. It should be enough for a security deposit on an apartment in, say, New Jersey, or maybe Queens, someplace affordable. You can also have the Honda." The lawyer beside Brandon, a nervous man named Mr. Gables, coughed to get his attention. "Mr. Cross, technically speaking, the Honda is currently leased through the business." "Just let her have the stupid Honda, Gables," Brandon retorted. "I am in a giving mood." He turned back to Audrey, a smug look on his face. "You see, I am a very reasonable person. Just sign the documents. I am expected for lunch at Per Se at 1 o'clock. Audrey glanced at the legal forms, then at the credit card. $10,000. She remembered meeting Brandon 2 years before, back when Nexus Stream was just an idea. He was constantly worried, struggling to pay his employees, and eating cheap meals at the diner where she worked part-time to take a break from her schoolwork. He had not saved her from anything. In fact, she had been the one who listened to his business plans. She managed his disorganized life long before he could hire Jessica. She had even dipped into her personal savings, which she told him was from her grandmother, to pay for his first office when his financial backers abandoned him. He had erased all of those memories. "Do you honestly believe your money is what I want, Brandon?" Audrey asked in a low voice. "Everybody is after money, Audrey. Particularly people from your background who have none," Brandon sneered. "Sign the paper. Quit stalling. Or are you hoping for some divine intervention?" Audrey inhaled deeply and reached for her purse. Brandon visibly recoiled, maybe thinking she was reaching for a weapon or legal papers. But all she produced was an inexpensive plastic pen. "I have no interest in your money, Brandon," she stated calmly, "and I do not want the car." "Have it your way," Brandon chuckled. "That leaves more for me. Just put your signature on the line." Audrey removed the cap from the pen. Her expression was not one of anger or sorrow. Instead, she seemed to be at peace. Just as the pen's point made contact with the document, the massive oak door at the far end of the room, swung open with a groan. A sudden hush fell over the room. At a firm like Holloway and Associates, interruptions during a sensitive divorce negotiation were strictly prohibited. Mr. Gables, the attorney, shot to his feet, his face turning a deep crimson. "I beg your pardon, Gables," barked. "This is a confidential meeting. You are not permitted to enter." An older gentleman entered the room. He appeared to be in his early 60s, his silver hair perfectly combed back. He was dressed in a dark gray three-piece suit that suggested wealth not through flash, but through quiet confidence. The craftsmanship was so exquisite that a brand name was unnecessary. The owner's identity was the only label required. He carried a walking stick, not because he needed it for support, but as a symbol of his power. He remained silent, crossing to the back of the room where he selected a chair in the dim light, away from the central table, and took a seat. "Who is this man?" Brandon asked sharply, swiveling in his chair. "Gables, call security immediately." The older man placed his hands atop his cane, and his gaze fell on Audrey. His eyes were a striking, cold blue, the very same shade as hers. "I am merely an observer," the man stated. His voice was low and raspy, with an inflection that hinted at a background of old New York wealth and an education in European private schools. "Please, go on. Pay me no mind." "An observer?" Jessica jeered as she jumped down from the windowsill. "What do you think this is? Entertainment for the public? Leave now, old man." "Brandon, get rid of him. He has the faint smell of an old closet." Brandon rose to his feet, forcefully straightening his shirt cuffs. "Listen here. I do not know who you are, but you need to leave. I am Brandon Cross, the Chief Executive Officer of Nexus Stream. My company leases this entire floor for our legal team. You're trespassing on private property. The old man's expression did not change. He took a pair of glasses from his coat pocket and placed them on his nose. You lease the legal counsel, Mr. Cross. You do not, however, own the property. My understanding is that this building is owned by Caldwell Holdings. Brandon hesitated. So, what does that make you? The maintenance guy here to fix a light bulb? Something along those lines, the man replied with a touch of irony. I was informed of a disagreement concerning certain assets. I find it interesting to see how the next generation conducts its affairs. Mr. Gables, the lawyer, suddenly lost all the color in his face. He peered intently at the man at the back of the room, noticing the silver hair, the particular style of his suit collar, and the gold ring on his smallest finger. Mr. Cross, Gables whispered urgently. Sit back down. What is it? Brandon demanded. Just sit down, Gables repeated, his voice shaking. Allow him to remain here. For what reason? Because if we create a disturbance, the property managers could decide to terminate our lease. Gables was lying, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. He knew precisely who the man was. He had passed by his portrait in the lobby every single morning for the last 15 years. But he was frozen by fear. He realized if he revealed that the legendary billionaire Harrison Caldwell was in the room, Brandon would immediately change his behavior. And Gables suspected the old man was there to witness Brandon's true character. Brandon sighed in frustration and slumped back into his chair. Fine, have it your way. If this old man finds divorces entertaining, let him stay and watch. This is almost finished regardless. He redirected his attention to Audrey. Do you see the kind of people I am surrounded by? Complete incompetence. Now, sign the paper. Audrey did not glance toward the older man. Her focus remained on the document in front of her. Are you absolutely certain about this, Brandon? Audrey asked, giving him a final opportunity. The moment I sign this, it is irreversible. I will leave this room and I will no longer be your wife. You will have no connection to me, and I will have no connection to you. A complete break. That is the absolute fantasy, Audrey, Brandon said with a grin. I have a meeting with the Caldwell Group next week. You probably have no idea who they are. Of course not. They are the largest venture capital company in the entire nation. Harrison Caldwell himself is scheduled to evaluate my company for a $100 million investment. For that, I have to be single. I cannot have any baggage. From the rear of the room, the old man made a soft noise, something between a cough and a stifled laugh. Baggage? The old man echoed. Is that how you view a wife? Brandon did not bother to turn. A wife who offers nothing to the partnership, yes. She is a liability. I require a partner who enhances my public image. Someone like Jessica. Jessica smiled brightly and moved to embrace Brandon from behind. Honey, why do you not tell him about our engagement party? Audrey went still. The pen stopped just above the paper. An engagement party? Brandon simply shrugged, showing no sign of remorse. Well, seeing as we are finalizing this today, I saw no reason to delay. We have reserved a space at the Plaza Hotel for this coming Saturday. It will be a joint celebration for my divorce and my engagement to Jessica. It is going to be the biggest event of the year, with every major investor and media outlet there. He gave Audrey a look of fake sympathy. I would send you an invitation, but security is going to have a strict guest list. A chill spread through Audrey's chest, but it was not the ache of a broken heart anymore. It was the sharp sting of clarity. You actually booked the plaza, Audrey stated flatly. The grand ballroom, Jessica chimed in, gloating, only the best of everything. The flowers alone are costing $10,000. How interesting, Audrey said under her breath. Her gaze shifted past Brandon, past Jessica, to meet the eyes of the old man sitting quietly in the back of the room. The old man offered her a tiny almost invisible nod. That was the signal she was waiting for. He was giving her his permission. Audrey put the pen to the document. Her name flowed onto the page in a smooth, graceful signature. Audrey Caldwell Cross. She turned to the next page and signed again. Audrey Caldwell Cross. On the final page, she signed one last time and then clicked the cap back on the pen. "It is done," she said softly. She slid the stack of papers over to Brandon. Finally, he snatched them up, quickly scanning the signatures. That was agonizing. "Gables, get these filed right away. I want the final divorce decree no later than Friday." He rose from his chair and straightened his suit jacket. He took Jessica by the hand. "Come on, sweetheart. Let us go and celebrate. I could really use a drink." He glanced at Audrey one last time. She remained seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "You can hold on to the pen," Brandon said, as if granting a great favor, "and do not forget your severance pay." He and Jessica headed for the door, walking right by the old man in the back. Brandon stopped for a moment. "Hey, old guy, the entertainment is over. You can get back to fixing pipes or whatever it is you do." The old man stayed perfectly still. A cold, shark-like smile spread across his face. "The show," the old man said, his voice calm and steady, "is just getting started, Mr. Cross." Brandon looked puzzled for a second, but then he just shook his head and walked out of the room. The sound of Jessica's high heels clicked loudly behind him. The door slammed, leaving the room in silence. Mr. Gables, the lawyer, was shaking so badly that his glasses started to slip down his nose. He got to his feet and gave a deep, respectful bow to the man in the back. "Mr. Caldwell," Gables stammered. I did not realize." Harrison Caldwell paid the lawyer no attention. He stood up, using his cane for support, and made his way to the table where Audrey was sitting. Audrey did not get up. She just kept her eyes on her hands. Harrison finally reached the table. He looked down at the signed divorce papers, then at the black credit card Brandon had tossed on the table, and finally at the young woman. "He called you baggage," Harrison said in a quiet voice. Audrey looked up at him. Tears began to form in her eyes, but she fought to keep them from falling. "Hello, Daddy." Harrison Caldwell, the billionaire who owned the very building they were in, the president of the Caldwell Group, and the one man Brandon was desperate to win over next week, let out a long sigh. He reached over and put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I told you he was a fool, Audrey," Harrison said, "but I had no idea he was actively trying to ruin himself." Harrison picked up the credit card Brandon had thrown down, the one loaded with her $1 million settlement. He looked at it with disgust. $1 million, Harrison said thoughtfully, "for the woman who will inherit the Caldwell empire." He casually tossed the card into a nearby trash can. "Come on, my dear. We have a lot of work to do. If he is so set on having an engagement party at the plaza this Saturday, then I believe we should make sure he gets one he will never forget. He actually believes he has the grand ballroom reserved." "Daddy," Audrey said, wiping a tear from her eye. "But does not Uncle Cyrus own the plaza?" "He certainly does," Harrison said with a wicked grin, "and I think it is about time." Brandon learns that in this city, you never bite the hand that is feeding you, especially when that same hand holds the note on your entire life. Harrison offered his arm to his daughter. "Let us do some shopping. You are going to need a new dress for an engagement party." At that exact moment, Brandon was trying to flag down a yellow taxi because the Uber surge pricing was outrageous, even after he had just been bragging about his wealth. A line of 3 black Escalades pulled up smoothly to the curb in front of the skyscraper. Audrey stepped out of the building's revolving doors with her arm linked through Harrison's. The doorman, The same one who had ignored Audrey every single morning for the past 2 years, whenever she brought Brandon his forgotten lunch, almost fell over himself. He knew that man. Everyone in New York City knew Harrison Caldwell. "Good afternoon, Mr. Caldwell," the doorman stuttered, rushing to pull open the rear door of the first SUV. "Afternoon, Higgins," Harrison replied with a nod, knowing the man's name because he owned the company that employed him. "Please make sure my daughter gets into the car safely." The doorman froze in place. "Your daughter, sir?" He looked over at Audrey, the quiet woman in the simple beige cardigan, the woman he had seen crying in the lobby just last week after her husband yelled at her for being 5 minutes late. Audrey gave him a small smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Hello, Higgins." She slipped into the plush leather interior, where the air smelled of fresh orchids. Harrison got in next to her, and the door closed, shutting out all the noise of Midtown Manhattan. "Home, sir?" the driver asked. "Take us to the Hamptons estate, driver," Harrison instructed. "We need to think clearly, and I need you to call Cyrus. Let him know I need the Pearl Suite at the Plaza ready for Saturday, and tell him to double the security team." As the car pulled into the flow of traffic, Audrey rested her head against the soft seat. The silence in the car felt heavy. "I'm sorry I did not tell you about him sooner," Audrey said in a whisper. I needed to know if he loved me. For me. Not for the money or the family connections. Just me, Audrey. "And now you know the truth," Harrison replied softly. "It was a very expensive lesson, my dear, but it was one you had to learn. You spent 2 years playing the part of a dutiful wife to a complete narcissist. You cooked for him, you cleaned for him, and you secretly managed his company's finances. You even used the dividends from your trust fund to anonymously pay off his first business loan." Audrey nodded slowly. "He still thinks some angel investor swooped in and saved him from going bankrupt." "I am the angel investor," Harrison grumbled. "Or, more accurately, you are. And next week, when he sits across the table from the Caldwell Group to ask for funding for his public offering, he is going to learn that his angel has come to call in the debt." At the same time, on the other side of town, Brandon Cross was opening a bottle of expensive champagne in his brand new office. The office was all glass and chrome, specifically designed to make visitors feel small. Jessica was twirling in his office chair, holding a champagne flute. "I cannot believe she just signed the papers." Jessica let out a laugh. "I honestly thought she would put up a fight for the apartment." "The woman has no backbone," Brandon sneered as he propped his feet up on his desk. "That is her entire problem. She thinks small, her mind is small, and her dreams are small. She was just dragging me down. Jessica, just look where I am now. I am single, my company's stock is about to take off, and in 3 days, I am announcing our engagement at the Plaza. It is the ultimate power play." His phone started buzzing. The call was from an unknown number. "This is Brandon Cross," he said into the phone with a confident voice. "Mr. Cross." The voice on the other end was female, crisp, and professional. "This is Eleanor Strick. I am the executive assistant to Harrison Caldwell." Brandon immediately sat bolt upright, almost knocking over his champagne. He waved his hands frantically at Jessica, signaling for her to be quiet. "Yes, Ms. Strick, it is an absolute honor to be hearing from you. Mr. Caldwell has looked over your initial proposal for your company, Nexus Stream," the woman continued. "He is very interested. He would like to personally attend your event this Saturday at the Plaza. He feels it will be the ideal setting to get a better sense of your character before he signs the funding agreements next week." Brandon's heart felt like it was going to pound right out of his chest. Harrison Caldwell was coming to his party. This was his big break. This was the key to everything. If Caldwell decided to back him, Brandon would be on the cover of every business magazine. That would be absolutely incredible, Brandon managed to say. Please let Mr. Caldwell know that he will be my guest of honor. He will be there, the woman confirmed, and he will be bringing a guest, a silent partner from the Caldwell Group who holds the final say on all new investments. Make sure you impress them, Mr. Cross. They do not tolerate fools. The call ended. Brandon let out a triumphant shout that echoed through the entire office. We did it, Jessica. Caldwell is coming. We are going to be billionaires. He grabbed Jessica and spun her around the room. I have to get a new suit. I need the best tailor in New York City. And you, go buy a dress that screams trophy wife. Everything has to be absolutely perfect. Nothing can be allowed to go wrong. Back at the Hamptons estate, inside a massive oceanfront mansion that was worth more than the entire economy of a small nation, Audrey stood before a mirror that stretched from the floor to the ceiling. Her old beige cardigan was gone, thrown in the trash. She was now wearing a luxurious silk robe. Behind her, a team of 3 fashion stylists who had been flown in from Paris and Milan were arranging rows of designer gowns. No, Audrey said, waving away a pink chiffon dress. It is too gentle. That was the old Audrey. She walked along the line of dresses, her fingertips brushing against fine silks, velvets, and satins. She paused when she reached a gown the color of a midnight sky. It was a deep, shimmering, blackish blue, with tiny diamonds sewn into the fabric of the bodice. The dress was structured, with sharp lines that demanded everyone's attention. This is the one, she announced. A very bold selection, Miss Caldwell, one of the stylists remarked. This is from the Vanquish collection. It is designed for a woman who is on the hunt. Audrey smiled. It was the first real smile that had touched her lips in months. It was a cold and dangerous smile. Exactly, she replied. I am not going to a party to celebrate an engagement. I am going to attend a funeral. A funeral, miss? Yes. Audrey faced the mirror again, and her blue eyes seemed to flash with fire. The funeral of Brandon Cross's entire career. Saturday night finally came, and the air was thick with a hot, electric feeling. The Plaza Hotel, a landmark of New York luxury right on the edge of Central Park South, was lit up and shining. A line of limousines was 3 deep at the main entrance. A crowd of photographers was already there, having been tipped off by Brandon's public relations team that a huge tech industry announcement was about to be made. Inside the grand ballroom, the atmosphere was one of unbelievable luxury. Brandon had not held back on any expense, mainly because he charged everything to his company, figuring the investment from Caldwell would easily pay for it all later. Giant crystal chandeliers, each one the size of a small car, hung from the gold-covered ceiling. Waiters, dressed in white tuxedo jackets, moved silently through the packed room, carrying trays with glasses of expensive champagne and plates of caviar. Brandon stood at the very top of the grand staircase. Stood on the grand staircase, his hand strangling the banister. He was sweating bullets. Stop fidgeting, Jessica hissed beside him. Her red sequin dress was so tight it looked painted on. A flashy and expensive piece with 0 class. You look like you've done something wrong. I'm just nervous, Jess, Brandon muttered, his eyes darting across the sea of people below. Caldwell still is not here. It is 8 o'clock. The invitation said 7:30. Billionaires are always fashionably late, Jessica sniffed, dismissing his concern. Look, there is the vice president of Goldman Sachs. The ballroom was teeming with the predators of Wall Street. There were men in $5,000 suits and women who seemed to be dripping in diamonds. But a weird tension crackled in the air, carried on whispers. Mr. Gables, the lawyer who had finalized their divorce just 3 days earlier, was propped against the bar, downing scotch like it was tap water. He was ghostly pale. Every single time the ballroom doors swung open, He practically jumped out of his skin. "Gables!" Brandon boomed, making his way down the stairs. "Why do you look like you have seen a ghost? Lighten up. Tonight is the big night." Gables stared at Brandon, his expression a strange cocktail of pity and pure terror. "Mr. Cross, are you certain you checked the guest list correctly?" "Of course I did," Brandon scoffed. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," Gables mumbled, turning his attention back to his glass. "Just good luck." In that exact moment, the live string quartet, which had been playing Mozart, fell silent. The enormous double doors at the ballroom entrance swung wide open. A deep hush blanketed the entire room. It was not the quiet of polite acknowledgement. It was the stunned silence that falls when true power enters a room. Harrison Caldwell was framed in the doorway. He carried himself like a king who had returned to reclaim his throne. He wore a custom tuxedo that fit him so perfectly it might as well have been a second skin. He leaned on his cane, and his silver hair shone brilliantly under the massive chandeliers. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Harrison Caldwell did not attend parties. He was a legend, a total recluse. His being here was the ultimate validation for Brandon Cross. A huge grin spread across Brandon's face. He quickly smoothed the front of his jacket and started to hurry toward the entrance. "Mr. Caldwell, I am so glad you could make it." But Harrison did not budge. He just stood there, waiting. He turned his head slightly, extending a hand back into the hallway, and the announcer's voice boomed, though it trembled just a little. "Presenting Miss Audrey Caldwell." The name just hung there in the silent air for a moment. Caldwell. Brandon stopped dead in his tracks. He blinked, confused. Audrey? No, that was impossible. His Audrey was a complete nobody. Her last name was, well, he could not actually recall her maiden name, mostly because he had never bothered to ask about her family. And then she walked into the light. It was definitely Audrey, but it was not the same Audrey who wore beige sweaters and seemed to apologize for taking up space. This woman was a goddess of revenge, sculpted from ice and draped in diamonds. A midnight blue gown clung to her every curve, with a slit that ran high up her leg, showing off heels that looked sharp enough to be weapons. Her hair, which was usually thrown into a messy bun, now flowed over her shoulders in perfect polished waves. Around her neck was a sapphire necklace, a famous piece once owned by the Russian Romanov dynasty, a jewel worth more than Brandon's entire company. She gracefully took her father's arm. She tilted her chin up. Her eyes scanned the room, dismissing the hundreds of faces until they locked onto Brandon's. She did not offer a smile. She just stared. "Oh my God," Jessica whispered, her clutch slipping from her fingers and hitting the floor. "Is that the wife?" Brandon felt all the blood rush from his face. His knees felt weak, like they might give out. "No, that is impossible. She is completely broke. I gave her $10,000. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea as Harrison and Audrey glided into the room. The silence was so thick you could feel it. Every single eye was fixed on them. Brandon, running on nothing but adrenaline and sheer denial, forced a smile onto his lips and stepped right into their path. "Mr. Caldwell." Brandon's voice was shaky. He cleared his throat to steady it. "Welcome, and Audrey. What in the world are you doing here? Did you get a job with the catering staff?" It was a foolish thing to say, a pathetic, desperate jab. A nervous murmur spread through the crowd. Someone let out a nervous laugh. Harrison Caldwell shot Brandon a look of pure, undiluted disgust. "Mr. Cross, you appear to be confused." Well, yes," Brandon stammered. "This is my ex-wife. I am not quite sure how she managed to get past security." "But she did not need to get past security," Harrison cut in, his powerful voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "She owns the security company. As a matter of fact, she owns this hotel." The champagne flute in Brandon's hand slipped from his grasp. It hit the marble floor with a loud crash. "What?" Brandon could only whisper. "Allow me to introduce you to, properly," Harrison said, placing a protective hand on Audrey's back. "You know her as Audrey, the woman you divorced 3 days ago because you said she was boring and brought nothing of value to the relationship. But the rest of the world knows her as Audrey Caldwell, my one and only daughter, the sole heir to the entire Caldwell fortune, and the majority shareholder of the very venture capital firm you are begging for money from." The room absolutely exploded. Gasps and shocked whispers shot through the crowd like electricity. Phones were suddenly up in the air, recording the entire confrontation. Jessica took a large step backward, putting as much distance as she could between herself and Brandon. Audrey then took one step forward. The scent of her perfume, something rare and incredibly expensive, washed over Brandon. "Hello, Brandon," she said. Her voice was like silk, confident, and completely different from the timid whisper he was used to. "You said you wanted a partner who fit your public image, remember? Someone with connections, someone with wealth." She gestured around the magnificent ballroom, at the baffled investors, at the terrified lawyer. "Well, here I am," she said, "but I am afraid my appearance fee is just a little bit higher than $10,000. Brandon's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out, like a fish out of water. "Audrey, wait. Baby, I had no idea. You never said anything. You never asked," she replied, her voice ice cold. "You were always far too busy talking about yourself." "But the prenup," Brandon said, desperately grasping at straws. "We signed a prenuptial agreement. You do not get anything." Mr. Gables, the lawyer, shuffled forward from the crowd, looking like he would rather be anywhere else on earth. "Actually, Mr. Cross—" "Shut up, Gables," Brandon snapped. "No, please, let him speak," Audrey commanded. Gables nervously wiped sweat from his brow. "Mr. Cross, the prenup clearly stated that both parties would leave the marriage with what they originally brought into it. Since Miss Caldwell brought in, well, billions in assets held in various offshore trusts, and you brought in a significant amount of debt, the division of assets is actually quite straightforward. Furthermore," Harrison added, clearly enjoying every second of this, "since you used Nexus Stream Company funds to lease the Honda she was driving, and since you admitted in a recorded legal deposition that you were giving it to her as a gift, that is an illegal transfer of company assets. And since you just admitted to fraud by hosting this private party on the company's dime," Harrison leaned in, his voice dropping to a low growl right next to Brandon's ear. "I do not think we will be investing in Nexus Stream, Mr. Cross. In fact, I believe my daughter, who happens to sit on the board of the bank that holds all your business loans, might just be calling in your debts, tonight." Brandon stared at Audrey. He looked at the woman he had thrown away like she was garbage. "Audrey," he begged, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "Please, it was all a terrible mistake. Jessica did not mean anything to me. I was just so stressed. We can fix this. We can renew our vows right now. Look, all our friends are here." Audrey just looked at him. For a brief second, Brandon thought he saw a flicker of pity in her eyes. Then she laughed. It was a light, musical sound. "Renew our vows?" she asked. "Brandon, I did not come here to get back together with you. I came here to absolutely ruin you." She turned to the band. "Play something festive," she commanded. "I suddenly feel like dancing." As the music started to swell, Brandon just stood there among the broken pieces of his champagne glass. He was forced to watch the love of his life and the fortune he had chased for years get spun away into the arms of a handsome European count who had just cut in to dance with her. The trap had finally snapped shut, and Brandon was the rat caught right in the middle of it. The music in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel played on, a cheerful Viennese waltz that was a cruel soundtrack to the utter devastation happening in the center of the room. For Brandon Cross, his entire world had just shattered into a million nightmarish pieces. Just 10 minutes ago, he felt like the king of New York. Now he was nothing but the court jester. He stood completely frozen as the crowd began to physically move away from him. In high society, failure is like a virus, and public humiliation is a death sentence. Nobody wanted to be caught standing anywhere near the man who had just divorced the Caldwell heiress for his secretary. "Brandon," a voice hissed right next to his elbow. It was Jessica. He turned toward her, desperate for at least one ally. "Jess, listen. We have to spin this. We can just say I knew the whole time. We will say it was a strategic move, a separation for tax purposes or something." Jessica looked at him like he was a disgusting bug she found on the bottom of her expensive shoe. She was not even looking at his face. Her eyes were locked past him, on the handsome European count now spinning Audrey around the dance floor. She was staring at the diamonds sparkling on Audrey's neck. "You idiot," Jessica spat out. "You absolute complete fool." "What?" "Babe, we are supposed to be in this together," Brandon pleaded, reaching out for her arm. She violently snatched her arm away. "Do not touch me. You told me she was some waitress. You told me she was a nobody. You made me look like an absolute fool in front of Harrison Caldwell. I did not know." "That is even worse," Jessica shrieked, her voice rising over the sound of the music. "You lived with her for 2 years, and you did not have a clue that she was worth billions of dollars? You are not a chief executive officer, Brandon. You are a blind, incompetent loser." She yanked the engagement ring from her finger, a 3-carat diamond that Brandon had bought on credit only yesterday, and threw it right at his chest. "I am done with you. Do not ever call me again. I need to go find someone who can actually afford to pay for my Uber home." Jessica then stormed off, shoving her way through the gawking crowd toward the bar, where she immediately started chatting up a vice president from J.P. Morgan. Brandon was left standing all alone. The ring bounced off his chest and rolled underneath a nearby table. He did not even try to find it. Suddenly, he found himself surrounded, not by friends and supporters, but by the very wolves he had invited to his party. "Cross?" The voice belonged to Simon Trent, one of Brandon's angel investors. "Is it for real? Does Caldwell own the debt on your Series B funding?" "Simon, just let me explain." "I am done with explanations," Trent snapped back. "I want my money out. Now. If Harrison Caldwell is your enemy, then this whole company is sunk. I am activating the clawback clause this evening." "You can't do that," Brandon said, his voice catching. "That would wipe out the entire operating account." "Just watch me," Trent said with a smirk. He took out his phone. "I am calling my lawyers." Just then, another person approached. It was the journalist from the Wall Street Journal that Brandon had personally begged to attend. "Mr. Cross," the reporter began, thrusting a voice recorder forward, "could you give us a statement about the rumors, the ones about you using company money for your mistress's apartment?" Miss Caldwell brought up a forensic audit. No comment. "Get that thing out of my face," Brandon snarled, batting at the device. Attacking a member of the press, the reporter grinned. "That will make a fantastic story for the Sunday paper. The headline will be, 'CEO has a public meltdown at his ex-wife's celebration.'" High above on a balcony, with a view of the ballroom, Harrison Caldwell and Audrey observed the unfolding chaos. A server delivered them fresh glasses of champagne. "This is positively barbaric," Harrison remarked with a sip, as he watched them rip Brandon to shreds. "He always craved the spotlight," Audrey stated, her tone completely empty of sympathy. "He demanded everyone's attention, so I simply granted his wish." She gazed down at Brandon. He was drenched in sweat, yelling at an investor, his tie was askew, and his face was a deep shade of purple from fury. He seemed so insignificant. "Did you ever truly love him?" Harrison asked in a low voice. Audrey paused for a moment. Her eyes followed Brandon as he pushed away a waiter offering him a glass of water. "I was in love with the person I imagined he was," she finally answered. "I loved the man who would eat grilled cheese with me at 2 in the morning, dreaming about how technology could change the world. But that man was never real. He was only an actor looking for a grander stage." "Well," Harrison said, stepping back from the balcony's edge, "the performance is over. Let us go, my dear. I think the board of directors is having an urgent meeting tomorrow at 8 in the morning. They will be discussing the foreclosure of Nexus Stream." "Foreclosure?" Audrey lifted an eyebrow in surprise. "Oh, absolutely," Harrison confirmed with a grim smile. "He failed to make a payment 3 months ago. We allowed it to pass because, at the time, he was part of the family. We are not allowing it to pass any longer." 3 weeks after that night, New York City showed no mercy. During November, the wind howled through the concrete canyons, bringing a sharp, cold rain that instantly drenched his cheap coat. Brandon Cross was standing just outside the massive glass headquarters of Cole Torper of the Caldwell Group. His expensive Italian wool suit was long gone, sold to a second-hand store. Instead, he wore a cheap raincoat from a pharmacy. He appeared to have aged 10 years. His face was thin and covered in stubble, and his eyes looked empty. His downfall had been both rapid and complete. The very next morning, after the disaster at the Plaza Hotel, the Securities and Exchange Commission began an investigation into his misuse of corporate money. The Nexus Stream Board had terminated him by lunchtime. At 2 in the afternoon, the bank demanded full payment on his personal loans. His luxury apartment was taken. His car was taken back. They even froze all his credit cards. He was now staying on his friend Mark's sofa in Jersey City. But Mark informed him just this morning that he needed to be gone by the weekend, explaining that his presence was killing the mood. Brandon glanced at his watch. It was an inexpensive, plastic digital watch. It read 12:30 in the afternoon. He was sure she would be coming out soon. She always went to lunch at 12:30. At least he still remembered that detail. The revolving doors began to turn. Brandon's heart jumped in his chest. A crowd of executives emerged, sharing a laugh. And right in the middle of them was Audrey. She was glowing. She had on a cream-colored power suit, and her hair was perfectly styled. She held a tablet and was speaking with a man who could have been a senator. Brandon rushed toward her. Audrey. Instantly, the security personnel at the building's entrance moved to intercept him, their hands reaching for their belts. All they saw was a messy, unkempt man yelling at the company heiress. "Ma'am, please move back," one of the guards ordered. Audrey paused. She raised her head and recognized him. She gestured to the guards with her hand. "It is all right, Frank. I am acquainted with him." The guards were reluctant, but they moved to the side. They created a human barrier between Audrey and the street, maintaining a 5-foot space. Brandon approached the invisible line, rain dripping off his nose. "Audrey?" he gasped. "I have been trying to reach you. You changed your number." "Yes, I did," she replied with a pleasant tone. "How have you been, Brandon?" "How have I been?" Brandon let out a laugh, a sharp and broken sound. "I am completely ruined, Audrey. They have taken it all. The business, the apartment. I only have $40 left. $40? Audrey's voice was serene. I recall having only $40. I was 19 years old and living in a college dorm. I refused to use any of my father's wealth because I wanted to know what the real world was like. It helps build character, don't you think? Just stop it, Brandon shouted, before quieting, his voice when he noticed people on the sidewalk staring. Listen, I understand. You were trying to teach me a lesson, and I have learned it. All right? I am humbled. I apologize. I was an arrogant jerk, but this is going too far. You cannot just ruin a person's entire life over a bad separation. I did not ruin your life, Brandon. Audrey corrected him. I simply quit financing it. Financing it? Who do you suppose persuaded the landlord to grant you 3 additional months for the office rent when you were just beginning? Audrey continued. I did. I gave him cash directly from my grandmother's trust fund. Who do you imagine repaired your presentation for the investors before the Series A funding? That was me. I rebuilt your entire financial plan from scratch while you were asleep. Brandon just stared. You made the financial plan? I did. And who do you believe recommended you to the editors at TechCrunch to secure that first major article? Audrey moved a step nearer, her gaze like steel. I was never merely a waitress, Brandon. I was your business partner. I was the motor that kept your broken-down car moving forward. You simply did not care enough to check under the hood. Brandon's shoulders fell. The rain felt frigid, but the reality was even colder. It hit him with a nauseating shock that she was telling the truth. Every single piece of good fortune he had experienced in the past 2 years, Audrey was always there behind the scenes. She would be smiling, giving him coffee, and telling him everything would be fine. He had confused her quiet skill for being unnoticeable. I need your help, Audrey, Brandon said in a low whisper, his arrogance finally breaking into pieces. I am completely out of options. Every door is slammed in my face. My reputation is toxic everywhere in this town. Please, I am begging for a job or even a loan. I will scrub toilets. Anything. Audrey just stared at him. This was the same man who once tossed a credit card in her direction and told her to get an apartment in Queens. As she reached into her handbag, Brandon stopped breathing. Was this it? A check to get him back on his feet? Maybe keys to a new place? Instead, her fingers came back with a simple business card. It was stark white, with nothing but a phone number printed on it. She offered it to him and said, "This is for a headhunter in Ohio," as she placed it in his hand. They focus on finding people for entry-level sales jobs. It is a respectable job, she continued. You will receive a standard salary plus whatever you make in commissions. Living expenses are low in Ohio. Brandon just gazed down at the card in his hand. Ohio. A beginner's sales job. This is a chance to start over, Brandon, she explained, her tone becoming slightly gentler. New York just chewed you up and spit you out. You lost your way in this city. Perhaps in a place where nobody knows your name, you can figure out how to be a human being again, not just a title on a door. With that, she began to walk away. Audrey, he pleaded, one final time. She paused, but did not face him. Did you ever actually love me? He asked. Or was I just some kind of project to you? Audrey gazed at her own reflection in the building's glass doors, the very building she was destined to lead one day. I loved you so much that I concealed my own identity just so you could feel important, she replied. But I love myself enough to refuse to be small anymore. She stepped through the revolving doors and disappeared into the lobby's welcoming heat. Brandon was left standing by himself in the downpour. He glanced down at the business card. It read, Midwest Auto Sales and Solutions. He looked up at the massive tower, vanishing into the fog. He understood in that moment that the gap separating him from Audrey was not merely made of glass and security. It was an entire universe. He slipped the card into his pocket, pulled his collar up to block the wind, and started the long journey to the bus terminal. A full 2 years went by after that drenched afternoon in front of the Caldwell Tower. As it always does, New York City had forgotten and moved forward. The entire Nexus Stream bankruptcy scandal had become a minor note in the business papers. It was now a warning story used in business classes about the risks of too much debt and not appreciating your partner. In the top floor office of the Caldwell Group, Audrey was seated at the enormous oak desk that her father once used. Harrison Caldwell had formally retired 6 months earlier to his vineyard in Tuscany, placing the whole empire in Audrey's care. She was no longer the woman from the gloomy meeting room who wore a plain beige sweater. She had become more intelligent, more powerful. Her hair was now in a stylish shortcut, and she was dressed in a custom-fit emerald suit that demanded attention. She was looking over the charity donations for the quarter when her assistant, a young man by the name of Leo, tapped on her door. "Miss Caldwell," Leo announced, "the mail has arrived. It is mostly routine, but there is one personal letter here. It does not have a return address, but the postmark says Columbus, Ohio." Audrey went still. The pen in her hand stopped moving just above the document. "Ohio. You can leave it here, Leo. Thank you." After the door closed softly, Audrey looked at the envelope. It was made of inexpensive, white paper. The writing on it was one she recognized, but it was not the messy, hurried signature of a prideful chief executive. Instead, it was a tidier, more careful handwriting. She took her silver letter opener and cut the envelope open. There was no note inside, no lengthy apology, and no justifications. All she found was a simple cashier's check. It was made out to Audrey Caldwell. The total on the check was for $10,000. Audrey just gazed at the amount. $10,000? It was the precise sum of money Brandon had tossed at her on the dark wood table when they divorced. He had called it her severance payment. She flipped the check to the other side. A brief message was written there in small blue ink. It said, "For the Honda and for the lesson. B." Audrey exhaled a long breath she had not realized she was holding. She rested her head on the back of her chair and gently closed her eyes. The towering skyline of New York City vanished from his mind, replaced by a bleak, snow-covered car lot. 500 miles from his old life, on the dreary edge of Columbus, Ohio, a bitter wind cut through the air. Brandon Cross breathed into his frozen hands for a little warmth and kicked the packed snow from his work boots. His heavy parka bore the stitched logo of Midwest Auto Sales. From the warmth of the office, his manager, a bear of a man named Big Tony, hollered, "Hey Cross, someone's out there, checking out the pre-owned sedans." "I'm on it, Tony," Brandon shouted back, his voice carried by the wind. He broke into a light jog, heading into the biting cold. The arrogant strut he once possessed was long gone, replaced now by a steady, more grounded pace. He saw a young couple, huddled together, for warmth beside a line of vehicles. They looked overwhelmed, like this was their very first time buying a car, probably stressing about financing and what they could afford. "Afternoon, everyone," Brandon greeted them with a sincere smile, the kind that lit up his whole face. "It is a chilly one out here. Are you two searching for a dependable car that's also affordable?" "Yeah," the young man stammered, clearly anxious. We can't spend a lot. We just need something to get us to our jobs." Brandon gave a knowing nod. "I understand completely. I know exactly what it's like to have to begin again. Follow me. I want to show you this Civic. The mileage is great, and I can talk to our finance manager to find a payment plan you can live with. Our goal is to help you, not take your money." Just as he guided them toward the vehicle, A loud fire engine red convertible roared onto the lot. It was a ridiculous sight against the bleak winter backdrop. Showy, noisy, and clearly very expensive. The driver's side door swung open, and a woman emerged. She was draped in a fur coat that screamed imitation, and her high heels were already disappearing into the icy sludge. It was Jessica. Brandon froze right where he stood. He hadn't laid eyes on her in 2 years, not since the day she had hurled his engagement ring at him back at the plaza. Time had not been kind. She looked worn and hardened. A thick layer of makeup failed to hide the fine lines of anxiety around her eyes. She saw him, and a cruel smile spread across her face as she sauntered over. "Well, well," she said with a harsh laugh, her eyes raking over his work coat. "If it isn't the mighty Brandon Cross, hawking beat-up cars in the middle of nowhere." Brandon turned to the young couple. "Please excuse me for just a second," he said, before walking to intercept her. The rage he once felt was gone, replaced by a deep sense of pity. "Hello, Jessica. What brings you to Ohio?" She answered with an effortless lie. "Just visiting some relatives. I heard you were around and thought I'd stop by." Her gaze traveled down his body and back up, and she wet her lips. "You know, Brandon, I got so tired of New York, and I dumped that banker I was with. The man was a total cheapskate. I was thinking, maybe we could get a drink? You know, for old time's sake. I'm sure you get pretty lonely out in this place." She moved in closer, her fingers brushing against the zipper of his parka. "We had something special, Brandon. We were a force to be reckoned with. Perhaps we can find a way to get out of this town. Together." Brandon glanced down at her hand. He recalled with perfect clarity how quickly she had abandoned him the moment his fortune disappeared. He remembered the shame of it all. He carefully took her hand in his and pulled it away from his jacket. "I'm not lonely, Jessica," Brandon said in a quiet voice. He shifted his body and gestured toward the large window of the dealership office. A woman was sitting behind the front desk inside. She was not a supermodel, and she clearly was not wealthy. Her name was Sarah, the receptionist. She had warm brown hair and a gentle smile, and at that moment she was knitting a scarf. Her eyes met Brandon's through the glass, and she gave him a joyful wave. Brandon smiled and waved right back. "I already have everything I could ever want," Brandon told Jessica. "And right now, I have clients to help. These are people who actually need something, not just someone putting on a show." Jessica's face twisted into a sneer, her pride obviously wounded. "You are pathetic." Brandon simply shrugged. "Maybe so, but I can look myself in the mirror." He turned away from her, for good, and went back to the couple standing by the Civic. "My apologies for that interruption," Brandon said to them. "Just dealing with a ghost from my past. Now let me pop the trunk for you on this amazing car." While he was going over the warranty details, a feeling of relief washed over him, a lightness he had not experienced in a very long time. That very morning, he had mailed a check. It was the result of 2 long years of pinching every penny from his commissions, surviving on instant noodles, and renting a tiny studio apartment. It had taken all that effort just to save up $10,000. He was starting from zero all over again, but his conscience was finally clear. Miles away, back in a New York high-rise, Audrey answered her phone. "Finance department," she said professionally. "Yes, Miss Caldwell. I have a check here for $10,000. It needs to be deposited into the Second Chance Scholarship Fund." The voice on the other end asked, "Certainly. Do you want to credit the person who donated?" Audrey glanced at the check one final time, before placing it in the outgoing mail tray. She thought about the man she was once married to, the man who was so determined to take over the world, and she thought about how he finally understood that you don't conquer your place in the world. You have to earn it. "Mark the donation as anonymous," Audrey instructed. She got up from her desk and moved to the massive window that overlooked the city. The sun was beginning to set over Central Park, bathing everything in a warm, golden light. Her anger had faded. Justice had finally been served. He had lost a fortune he never truly earned. But maybe, just maybe, out there in the cold Ohio winter, he had reclaimed the part of himself that he had lost along the way. Audrey smiled, her fingertips resting on the cool pane of glass, and she spoke softly to the sprawling city lights. "We're square now, Brandon. The score is finally settled." She switched off her office lights and left, heading out to have dinner with her father. She walked with confidence, Bapush, not because of her immense wealth, but because she was finally secure in who she was, and she knew with certainty that no one would make the mistake of underestimating her ever again. And that's the tale of how a modest $10,000 check ultimately toppled an entire empire. But in the process, it might have given him back his soul. This story is a powerful lesson that you can never be sure who holds the real power in any situation. Brandon assumed he was just signing papers to end his marriage to a woman with no influence. In reality, he was signing away his entire lavish lifestyle. So, what is your take on all of this? Was Audrey's revenge at the plaza too extreme? Or did Brandon receive the exact consequences he had earned? And what about the $10,000 he paid back? Do you believe that action redeems him? Is that enough for him to be forgiven? This is not just about revenge. It is about knowing your worth when the world tells you that you are nothing. It is about the power of patience, the danger of arrogance, and the beautiful justice that comes when someone finally sees you for who you truly are. If you have ever been underestimated, overlooked, or thrown away by someone who thought they were better than you, this story is your reminder. Your time will come, and when it does, you will not need to say a word. Your success will speak loud enough. If this story touched something inside you, hit that like button to let me know. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been underestimated? I read every single comment, and I would love to hear your story. Share this with a friend who needs to hear this message today. And if you are new here, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story about karma, justice, and the quiet power of women who refuse to stay small. This content has been carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful stories and valuable life lessons.